Hello, Professor Devisch. Am I audible to you?
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sukhendu Das, speaking on behalf of the Center for Research in Posthumanities, Bankura University. This is the second talk of our In Memoriam lecture series. And let me introduce our esteemed speaker today. Professor Ignaas Devisch is a public philosopher, professor of medical philosophy and ethics. He is also an author and columnist and provides consultancy in the field of aesthetics and philosophy. He is currently affiliated with the medical faculty of Ghent University and regularly publish and speak at home and abroad, both for a specialized and a broad audience. Since 1st September 2021, he is the head of a think tank named Itinera. He appears as a regular guest on radio and television to give interpretation on ethical and philosophical issues. He is also a regular columnist at The Standard. He has published numerous books, book chapters, articles, and presented conference papers. I would request our audience to visit his website, www.ignaasdevisch.com. Here you will give an exhaustive list of his published work, and some of his books in English are Jean-Luc and The Question of Community. It was translated into English in 2013. It was published in 2013 by Bloomsbury. And I must express my debt to Professor Ignaas Devisch because this book introduced me to the rich world of Jean-Luc. He has edited a volume with others, Retreating Religion, Deconstructing Christianity with Jean-Luc. His highly acclaimed critical essay about medicalization, Sick of Health, was published in 2013. His latest book is Fire, a Forgotten Issue. It has been published in 2021 by D. Bay Sekha Bai, where he demonstrates why the moment man gained control over fire is such an important tipping point in history. Uh, Honorable Vice Chancellor Sir is not with us because he is very busy in a meeting. Still, he has expressed his best wishes for this event. Now, I would request our registrar, Dr. Saurabh Datta, to share his thoughts on this event. Dr. Saurabh Datta.
Thank you. I wholeheartedly welcome Ignaas Devisch this event. It's a great privilege for all of us to get you, sir, among us for this event. The moment I came to know that you are going to deliver the speech, out of curiosity, several times I attempted to know more and more about you through Wikipedia and other sources available in the internet. And whatever I have found, it gave me immense pleasure just to know that a man of your stature is coming to us, although in virtual platform, to deliver speech. So this is a great moment for Bankura University as well. Being the registrar of Bankura University, I wholeheartedly acknowledge my gratefulness to you that you are going to deliver the lecture. I'm happy that the Center for Research in Posthumanities, Bankura University, they are in the process of conducting such lectures. And today is one of those events. I came to know that you were born in 1970 on 15th August. This is interesting. 15th August is the Independence Day of India. You know it. And when I came to know that your research mainly focuses on philosophical issues in healthcare, it gave me immense curiosity to know more about it. You were associated as a philosopher at Ghent University. You were basically a professor in ethics, philosophy, and medical philosophy, Ghent University. This is, of course, a great privilege for all of us. I don't know how much you know about Bankura University, but it's a university. It's a state university in the province of West Bengal in India. And this is a university having around 13, 14 post-graduation courses and scopes for the researchers to pursue their PhD. And it's an affiliating university. So under the affiliation of this Bankura University, there are around 24 state aided or government colleges. And in those colleges, undergraduate courses are going on. And also in a few colleges, post-graduation courses are going on. And in our main campus, mainly the post-graduation courses are going on, mainly, not only. So in this way, through our collective effort, Bankura University is doing fantastic job. And today, your inclusion in this event is going to be a great achievement for all of us. I wholeheartedly want the success of this event. Let this event be very successful. Let the audience be enriched by listening to your lecture. Thank you very much. Before I finish, I, from my heart, wish very best of you, very best of luck to you in your personal life, in your professional life, in your family life. You please consider me and us as your well-wishers. This is what we want to express from India, from Bankura University. This bond, this connection of you with Bankura University should remain forever. This is what I can say as the registrar of this university. Thank you, Professor Devisch. Let it be a fantastic session. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Saurabh Datta, Registrar. Again, our esteemed speaker is Professor Ignaas Devisch. He is going to give a talk on with or without you, Jean-Luc is being reinvestigated. I again welcome Professor Ignaas Devisch. Professor Devisch, the stage is all yours. Please continue.
Thank you very much. And I think I must say good evening to you. Here it is around noon, but thank you very much for inviting me, though be it virtually, but maybe it could be a first step up to meet in the future, or in Belgium, either in India or someone else in the world. And I would be happy to know more about your university and specifically your center. Thanks also for the warm words of the registrar to welcome me and to wish me success in my personal and professional life. Of course, my gratitude towards you for the invitation and for these words is enormous. And I'm also honored to speak to you. I was once in India, I think for about 6 years ago in the province of Bangalore, also to have a speech then on the introduction of philosophy education at universities and how to use it to orientate students in this complex world. But today I was asked to indeed to make a presentation on my work on Jean-Luc Nancy. And I prepared a presentation. I will try to share that with you so that we can go through it. If all goes well, I think you are able to see this now. If this is not the case, please give me a sign or a call and we can arrange it. But anyway, what I have prepared to, because the books that were referred to, I'll mention them in a couple of minutes also. This is in fact the very start of my academic career as a philosopher. During my PhD, I learned to know the work of Jean-Luc Nancy, and I remember quite well reading Nancy as a young student. I was digging into some books of him, like La Communauté désirée, the inoperative community. And I also remember that I didn't understand a single clue of it. It was a very complex way of writing, and though I was fascinated by his analysis of other French philosophers, such as Georges Bataille or Maurice Blanchot, but to me at that time, Nancy's writings were too complex for me to get a grip on them. Nevertheless, I kept on reading and his work, and I'm doing this till today. So what I'm going to tell you is, of course, based on my work on Jean-Luc Nancy, also on my talks with him. I started corresponding with Jean-Luc at the very beginning of my PhD, and then he invited me at his house in Strasbourg. We had some wonderful talks there. I followed some seminars in Strasbourg, and one of the books that were referred to, I'll show the front page later on, is in fact a collaboration between me, some other researchers, and Jean-Luc Nancy himself. So unfortunately, he died, but we will remember, of course, his very rich writings on so many topics. So together with you, because that's what I'm actually trying to do, I will make a sort of close reading. That's also the reason why I entitled my lecture With or Without You, because what Jean-Luc Nancy wrote about community or being with is one of the central topics in his work. And I will try to present a sort of close reading of his line of thought during his writings from the very early beginning till the end, ending up with the question, can Nancy's idea of being with still of importance, still be of importance to us today? Like Maurice Blanchot in the unavowable community, the early Jean-Luc Nancy imbued his reflections with Bataille's negative determination of community that was formulated like a community of those who have no community, or a community without communality, or a negative community, that sort of wordings. For Blanchot, this was in fact the ultimate form of communal experience. And according to Nancy, Georges Bataille went the furthest in his investigation into the fate of modern community. So at his very early writings on community, Nancy develops this negative community as one that does not result in unification or total fusion, and thus shares Blanchot's concern with how to understand Bataille's concept of insufficiency. So Nancy and Blanchot agreed that such insufficiency, a shortage, so to say, constitutes the principle of every finite community. And that's in fact what also during my PhD and partially was dedicated to in some of the chapters of my book, Jean-Luc Nancy and the Question of Community. How can we understand what Jean-Luc Nancy's thinking on community is all about? So Nancy's tried to develop that topic from the very early stage of his career. And I will present you a lot of quotes to give an idea of his line of thought. And the very first one is the fact that Nancy states that the fact that we have lost something is not something we should regret, but is something is something that might give us an opportunity. So the very first quote is from Being Singular Plural, Être Singulier Pluriel, where he states that the very moment when there is no longer a command post from which a socialist vision could put forward a subject of history or politics, or in an even broader sense, when there is no longer a city or society out of which a regulated figure could be modeled, at this moment, being many, shielded from all intuition, from all representation or imagination, presents itself with all the equity of its question, with all the sovereignty of its demands. So for Nancy, having this lost, having this, let's say, historic stage behind us, this confronts us with the basics of who we actually are and how we can understand ourselves as human beings. So this fundamental question, which to Nancy was always central to his work, the most, let's say, ontological, the most basic questions you can pose, like how to understand the world and how to understand mankind. To him, the fact that this horizon was lost opened up the world into the question, the naked question, how to understand ourselves and how to relate to each other. And that's my second quote. What is happening, he writes, is that the immense coexistence of things and people, of beings, in short, the world, has begun to pull away from the representation of a destiny. And then he enlists what that destiny might have been from an arrangement, an idea, a kingdom of ends. And it has started to matter in and of itself, to refer to and to network with itself. In short, and there it pops up for the very first time in my lecture, but I will mention that concept quite a lot. It has started to comprise a coexistence, meaning that the sense of the world, which was always projected outside of the world, and then Nancy says, well, the sense of the world no longer lies outside of it. It is in it, in its proximity and its strangeness, each one infinite. Now, how to understand this infinity? Nancy, as it is the case with community or with coexistence, Nancy refers to finitude quite a lot in his writings. He says finitude is not a privation. It does not exist in a limitation. It sets itself up, or which sets itself up dependent upon infinity and an immanent relation of sublimation or of recovery of his infinity. This means, paradoxically, that we are, and I quote Nancy here, that we are infinitely finite, infinitely exposed to our essenceless existence, to the otherness of our own being. So finitude, being finite, means not to be able to enclose yourself upon yourself, to be opened to the other than yourself. Then he says, well, it is not just our human existence, but also the community that is a fundamentally finite happening for Nancy. This finitude is not posited to deplore the unreachability of infinity or to indicate human beings' nullity in relation to the infinity of a higher instance, God, the cosmos, you name it, nor even to escape this lack precisely through founding an immortal community. A finite community, or being in common or coexistence, as Nancy subsequently calls it, is the point of departure for thinking identity, both at the level of the individual and that of community. It is no longer from the position of self-sufficiency or of auto-production. Now, these are the early writings of Nancy. At least I'm trying to summarize them, or at least a couple of thoughts. To expand on the problematic begun with his readings of Bataille, Blanchot, and Hegel in the early 80s, Nancy turns increasingly in the 90s towards a critical rereading of Heidegger. It is not that Nancy at a certain moment chooses Heidegger over Hegel or Bataille, but one can clearly see from the development of his oeuvre that Heidegger becomes his focus for an elaboration of community as what is called a non-appropriable immediacy, or a plurality that does not imply the fusion of identities, as Nancy expressed in an interview with a French newspaper, La Libération, in the year 2000. There he says, well, community is not an object. It is not a subjective property or a yet to be constituted private entity, but it forms the condition of our existence, our being in the world as such. And this is what he claims in this interview. So you hear the echo of Heidegger quite a lot present during that interview. Well, of chief interest to him, to Nancy, are what he calls the ontological conditions of the presupposition of every form of community. Nancy obtains insights into these ontological conditions through a Heideggerian-inspired existential analysis, a fundamental analysis of the being of community. And Nancy demands that we ask ourselves, especially in this era where, let's say, the horizon has opened up, where all securities about how to live with each other, how to relate to each other, were have become less secure, have become more insecure, especially in this era. Nancy demands that we ask ourselves what it means that we are in common and always together. Next quote. This is from a rather small text published in a journal. There he writes, we are someone, others, and the rest of the world. We are with just as much and exactly as much as we are to Kur. And this very first line is in fact a summary of, let's say, 10 years of writings of Nancy on being with and community related to Heidegger. We are with just as much as we are. So it means that being cannot be thought without being with. Even to be alone, he writes, is also a way of being with. To be with in the like or in the absence. Without being with, I would not be alone. I would be purely and simply, absolutely. I would be all or nothing, but neither alone nor with. So the paper I'm quoting from is The Insufficiency of Values and the Necessity of Sense. Well, that kind of quotes, I don't know how many of you are familiar with reading Jean-Luc Nancy, but that kind of quotes actually demonstrate why I, as a young student, had to reread that kind of passages over and over again to actually understand what they were all about. But nevertheless, the power of Nancy's writings are in fact that he tried to pin down this era on what it faces today, is the fact that if we live in a world, if we consider the idea that we're all human beings living in one world, what would that actually, or what could that actually mean? So rather than speaking about rehabilitation of an earlier ontic foundation of community in a being, let's say God, people, race, culture, as you see in so many identitarian movements today, also politically, Nancy begins from the condition of being in which we are placed. We are, he writes, already in relation with others, even before we can begin to speak of community. This ontological condition, as he describes human existence, is the condition of every concrete meaning of communality, but it is by the same token, a condition that is forgotten in many ontic determinations of community. So what he tries to reveal is, let's say, the ontological precondition before we can even start talking about what kind of community are we talking about. The fact that we are being with makes whatever kind of particular community possible, but we should never forget those basic conditions that determine in more than one way our being able to talk, even to talk about community as such. He also claims that we, for some reason, have forgot that because we were too much focused on determining in a particular ontic criterion, such as race or shared identity or shared culture. We have, in fact, forgotten these important conditions, and that's the reason why he's so he was so focused on revealing that. And he says such forgetting is at work in the claim that community forms itself around a pre-existing foundation, a specific origin, a shared narrative, an essence or destiny. So his claim is that even before people start determining what community is all about and who should be included or excluded, there is something that precludes that. And we should stress these ontological conditions to understand, in fact, what community or being with is all about. Now, when such a foundation disappears, such a foundation as we face today, like the world is opened up, it is way more difficult to say that who is included in my nation or not. How do we share identities? People come from all over the world living in one country. And so when such a foundation disappears or is being shaken up, we normally speak about a crisis of community. Nancy says, well, this crisis is more the crisis of a certain foundation, metaphysical foundation of community, than the crisis of community as such. So what we need, therefore, is nothing less than a Copernican revolution, a revolution concerning ontological sociality itself, where the community no longer revolves around an ontic being, like a shared identity or a shared race. The reason why he does not speak about being common, but speaks about being in common, is to stress the fact that being with has nothing to do with the sharing of a specific essence or identity or culture. For Nancy, it is precisely the attempt to found community in a higher being that has destroyed community and renders it inoperative. So he radically breaks with every essential interpretation of a particular we as the basis for the thought of community, and frequently turns for this to explicitly Heideggerian language, who, as you might know, of course, also always has stressed the ontological dimension of our existence. As Heidegger would say, we are already thrown into a place in the world, but the situatedness, that's what Nancy stresses, this situatedness does not necessarily place us in an exclusive social connection with a limited number of people with whom I am supposed to share an identity. That's what is called nativism. If you're born in one country, then you share more with some people than others. which is of course the case in the empirical sense of the world. But if it comes down to what is actually being with, then we should look further than the shared identity as such. So to Nancy, and he goes on and on and on that same particular point, the finite condition in which we are thrown places us precisely in a relation to others and to the world before we actually enter a specific community. It is all about the openness, the transcendence, the condition of being that precedes the foundation of a community in being. So the question is does not whether, but how to speak about community today. So in fact, the observation that Nancy does not stop writing on being with, coexistence, community until his very late writings means that to him, this is really one of the major topics of the 20th and 21st century that we should deal with in order to understand how our relation to the world can be understood in the future. Why is it so important? Well, I'll recall it once more, the falling away of specific or moral, political or moral foundations. This falling away forces us to search for new horizons. And it is with such a quest that the problem of community today is confronted, given also the success of identitarian movements worldwide. If you look, the political parties who have a lot of success today, not only in Europe, but also elsewhere, are often focused on our own people first, or our shared identity. To Nancy, he says we should investigate first and foremost what it means for the social bond for community. Like the universe, community in this era of globalization is always one single world that is united, but in which everything is distracted, wandering without direction, without goal, without destination. This is again a quote from that interview in the French newspaper La Libération. We should not deplore the fact that this world has no origin, direction, or goal, but welcome it as a great freedom, another major topic of Nancy, freedom, as a great freedom, and therefore also as a great responsibility. Now, to describe with, for who of you who have read already his work, Nancy developed several concepts. One of them is what he calls compearance. Compearance. He says, we compare, we come together in or into this world. It is not that there is a simultaneous arrival of several distinct units, as when we go to see a film together, but that there is not a coming into the world that is not radically common. It is even the common itself. To come into the world is to be in common. So compearance, being in common, coexistence, being with, these are all, let's say, similar concepts to express the idea that we should reflect thoroughly about this ontological condition of human beings being thrown into the world. So, as I already stated, it is finally Heidegger who Nancy is referring at when it comes down to develop a new kind of thought, a new understanding of being with. Now, briefly, some words on Heidegger. To Heidegger, one can only pose the problem of the other on the basis of a more primordial question of being. The problem of the other is an ontological question, and it doesn't matter of inquiring into the being of the other. Because I am myself only once thrown in the world, Heidegger, of course, Heidegger speaks about Dasein, being in the world. Dasein states the fact of already being in the world, and it is from such thrownness in the world that the givenness of my being derives, and the fact that it will have to be my being. There is no escape from it. I have to live my life. Now, Dasein means not only that I relate to myself, but also that I am already in and opened to the world, to the whole of being. This openness of the relation to being already implies a relation to the other. As François Raffoul, the Heidegger expert, states it, insofar as it is itself, Dasein is opened to others, in trying to summarize what actually Heidegger tried to express with that. Well, if we go down to what Heidegger then writes about being with, he says, I quote here from Sein und Zeit, being with is such that the disclosedness of the Dasein with of others belongs to it. This means that because Dasein's being is being with, its understanding of being already implies understanding of others. These are the words of Heidegger, and Nancy is interested about them because what we actually can read here is a sort of fundamental openness to the world and to others. And Heidegger describes that in terms of the transcendent character of Dasein, or being in the world. Dasein to Heidegger is never closed up in itself, but is always and already in advance of itself. It means that it is directed towards that which is other than itself, or towards itself as another. Dasein is marked by this relational, or what Heidegger calls ecstatic structure from the outset. Dasein is always being with others, and being alone is a deficient mode of being with. So this particular point is what interested Nancy. So Nancy, Heidegger forces or forges new paths in the way one can think the question of community, but to him, he does not go far enough as he could or should have gone. Nevertheless, it seems absurd for Nancy to announce the end of the politics of destination with reference to someone who emphasized the Geschick des Volkes, and to think community again from out of Heidegger's thoughts. I mean, we all know how deeply Heidegger was engaged into Nazism, and how deeply he was convinced of the fact that Nazism had some sort of historic destination that he wanted to understand. It seems very paradoxical that the one who actually made the mistake, so to say, to still believe in this politics of destination is to Nancy at the same time his source of inspiration to rewrite and to rethink being with in the 21st century. So how can Nancy, who has written in almost lyrical ways about the fleetingness of everyday contact in the city, to mention only one example, how can he fall back onto Heidegger? Now, in another interview in Le Monde from 1994 already, Nancy explains his engagement with Heidegger's over. This is, yeah, that's the next quote, sorry. First of all, I quote from the interview in Le Monde. Nancy says, I try to take from this thought everything that it can and must amount to when one understands from the most extreme distance of that which led Heidegger to ascend to Nazism. So he takes whatever he can from Heidegger and tries to take a distance from what Heidegger led to Nazism. Certainly, it is not difficult, Nancy says, to see where the divorce lies in being and time between the call for heroic authenticity, imaged in a people, and the care for an authentic existence as pure existing in the strong sense of the word, singular and revealed to finitude, and thus also everydayness. What Heidegger has taught us is the necessity to radically rethink the everyday. The fact that he got lost in this question is itself a lesson. End of quote. So what he states here is in fact the opportunity of Heidegger's concept of being with, and at the same time, the necessity to learn the lesson from where Heidegger actually felt to be more radical than he actually dared to do, more radical when it comes down to the everydayness, the everyday relationships we have with each other. So Nancy's relation to Heidegger is at least dual. On the one hand, Nancy is inspired by Heidegger's thematization of being with and finite existence. And on the other hand, in the decision of existence, he distances himself from Heidegger's political engagements. Now, how does this dual attitude come to the fore in his book, Being Singular Plural? A crucial book when it comes down to me, a crucial book to understand the idea of being with in Heidegger's and in Nancy's writings. A strong start for much of 20th century philosophers' attempt to think the finite of being with was in fact made by Heidegger, but it remains to Nancy unfinished. It didn't finish the job, so to say. So rather than reversing Heidegger, Nancy proposes a radicalization of Heidegger's co-originality of being with design. And this is consistent with the analysis of Nancy himself in the decision of existence, which amounts to a radicalization of being with, rejecting any appeal to an original authenticity. Now, in the inoperative community, a book which was published in 1991, in English, but was actually written some couple of years before, first as a paper and then as a book, La Communauté des Hervés. So let's say by the end of the 80s, Nancy already wrote this following lines. There he says, all of Heidegger's research into being for or toward death was nothing other than an attempt to state this thought: I am not a subject. Although when it came to the question of community as such, you see this line of thought already present here, the same Heidegger also went astray with his vision of a people and a destiny conceived at least in part of a subject, which proves no doubt that Dasign's being toward death was never radically implicated in its being with, in its Mitsein. And it is this implication that remains to be thought. End of quote. So the idea that the thought and the writing of Heidegger, especially on being with, has a huge potential, but an unfinished potential, this was actually what Nancy tried to express in his idea, like we should take up the thought of Heidegger where Heidegger had lost it, so to say. In his text, Being in Common, we find a similar statement. There Nancy writes, and sorry for the many quotes, but at the same time, this close reading might help you in understanding what is actually at stake in Nancy's writings. There he writes, Heidegger's Mitsein, and even his Mit-Dasein, is not thought out as radically or as decisively as it should be. It would really need to understand that the myth does not modify design, as if being could already sustain itself in some way, as if being were itself, that is, as if being were or existed absolutely. So it means that we should not think of human beings as subjects, so to say, that first of all start from we are all by ourselves and then we enter our relationship to others. No, there is no Dasein without the fact that every Dasein is already also Mitsein from the very beginning. So then the question remains how Nancy renders this radicalization of Heidegger's being with more concrete. Moreover, elsewhere in Being and Time, Heidegger makes it clear that for him, the with constitutes being from the outset. So Nancy's criticism is therefore moderate, more moderate in its recent work. If in the inoperative community, already in the 80s, he still speaks of Heidegger as such, in Being Singular Plural of 1996, it has become the Heidegger of Being and Time. However, is this criticism really that moderate? Nancy opens Being Singular Plural with the statement that with has still not been radically thematized as the central question of ontology, not even by Heidegger. And if this is not enough, later in the same text, he lays it on even thicker. And that's the second quote here on this slide. It is necessary to rewrite Being and Time. It is in fact a weird quote. If I'm rereading that, it's interesting in more than one way. It is necessary not to rewrite Being and Time. This is not a ridiculous pretension, and it is not mine. It is the necessity of all the major works insofar as they are ours. One can guess without much trouble that this necessity also belongs to the stakes of a political rewriting. So again, why must Being and Time be rewritten from the viewpoint of the problem of community? Nancy's reservations about refounding community in a thought of origin is inspired by in the first place by a fear of introducing the we capitalized as a substantial and exclusive identity. Let's say what you see in political extreme right parties, like the only way they can talk about we is to make of it a substantial bond between people because they share the same race or the same culture or the same identity. Well, to Nancy, we should be afraid of that kind of identitarian movements because, in fact, he relates that to what happened during the Nazi period in Germany, that it led to the idea that only the people who share this identity, who share this values, or who share this culture, or share certain biological characteristics, are being allowed to that community. So if we actually talk about the world is opened up, we are living in a global world, how to still try to think community with this, let's say, 19th century concepts. So the idea, the conviction of Nancy that we need new ways of thinking community is inspired by that. If we still and keep on falling back upon these categories that we're used to in the 19th and 20th century, we will also fall back into the same faults. So we should learn lessons, not only from what happened then, but we should also learn lessons from where Heidegger actually failed or stopped his thoughts and make it as a new starting point to think community into the 21st century again. So this fear of a we as a substantial and exclusive identity, to couple the possession of a shared characteristic with a certain primordial givenness or anticipated future destiny, leaves the door wide open to the logic of what you could call a final effort. There's always a final effort to make in order to arrive at your ending point. Now, a second reason is that rather than a renewed plea for particularism, what is needed today, Nancy thought during the decades he wrote on that topic, what is needed is a thorough reflection on how, in defiance of atomized individual, Nancy criticized as much that kind of, let's say, thin idea of individuality as he did with the thick idea of community, let's say in between liberalism and communism. And Nancy tried to start with a new reflection on how, in an era of atomized individualism, how to still talk about community. In other words, Nancy uses Heidegger's mistake to gain insight into the problem of community today. Now, to him, this problem lies in the first place in the fact that with the collapse of communist regimes in Eastern Europe by the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, something has there been revealed that poses us a new challenge. So as I already mentioned in the first quotes, of course, Nancy always considered the world to be radically opened, and our thinking of who we are needs to find other registers than the ones based on identity. Now, I quote at length from another publication or another book of him, The Birth of Presence. There he writes, we must understand the created world, this created between bracelets, of course, as a world of bodies, a world in which bodies come to presence. That is, a world in which bodies are the bodies they are. In the meantime, there are 5 billion human bodies. Soon, and we can confirm that today, there will be 8 billion. Not to say anything of the other bodies. So he says humanity is becoming tangible, and also in its inhumanity. But then what is the space opened between 8 billion bodies, 16 billion eyes, 80 billion fingers, to see what, to touch what? Since we know that it is all for nothing, for no other purpose than to exist. That's also one of the first quotes. The sense of existence lies in the existence itself. So it does not exist for no other purpose than to exist. And to be those bodies, what will we be able to do to celebrate a number? So how to, let's say, deal with ourselves and our relation to the world. This dimension of humanity is crucial to understand what is going on in this world and in Nancy's writing also. In particular, he always stressed the ontological shift of how we understand the world as the basis of a renewed understanding of ourselves. The truth with which we are unavoidably confronted and that our history presents to us is not that sense takes place within signification and through it, but that sense is, on the contrary, the element in which there can be significations, interpretations, or representations. Sense is not language. It is not the logos in general that makes sense, but the opposite. Sense, in this sense, it's quite cryptic, I know, but that's the way he writes and plays with the two words in French, sens et signification, sense and signification. Sense is not a meaning. It is not a signification, whether determinate or indeterminate, completed or still in progress, already present or yet to be won. Sense is the possibility of significations. So here you see a sort of, well, link, a line of thought between how to understand the world. The world has no other sense than the world itself. There is no, well, you can always project a meaning in it, but the world does not make sense. It does not have any sense. It is the sense. That's the first thought. Second thought, we as human beings are thrown into that world. The only thing we can do, or at least the starting point of everything we can do, is to relate ourselves into the, or to position ourselves into the world and to relate ourselves to the world, to others, trying to pose the most fundamental and therefore the first question to pose also, how to understand our relationship to that world, given the fact that the sense of this world lies in itself. Now, sense, so to say, is the ontological screen, the coexistential condition in which something like signification becomes possible. It is the place from which the world becomes comprehensible to me, the framework through which the world is unlocked for us. We are always thrown into sense, and sense opens us to being, to relationality or being to. Now here Nancy explicitly builds on Heidegger's concept of in der Weltsein as what is called in German transcendence. Insofar, I already went to that line of thought to Heidegger, insofar as Dasein exists in the world, it is always also with others and is outside itself. That's the transcendence. Through its transcending, Dasein opens itself to itself as factual and firm being. So being in the world, this is the core of Heidegger's thought, of course. Being in the world is existing, relating to oneself, being in advance to oneself, being open to something other than itself. So existing always means being ahead of oneself, so to say, transcending. So transcendent is not so much a relation to the world and to others, but the most basic ontological relation of Dasein and the condition of possibility for every relation. The fact that we as human beings are not enclosed upon itself, are transcending ourselves, makes the idea plausible that Dasein is always already also Mitsein. If being in the world is transcendent, well, then human beings cannot but be understood from the idea of being with. Being opened to the other in an ontological manner, so that which is exterior to sense or to being in the world, is what renders every other production or social immanence destitute. The structure of sense implies a transimmanence and a plurality of expression. Sense must thus also be central in every consideration of community. Sense is shared with others or does not. And we must think community today from out of sense or sharing. Sharing is equal to plurality and to being in common in which sense unfolds. I quote again, as soon as the appearance of an out of the world is dissipated, and he therefore means in our thought, of course, you can still believe in whatever you want, but the idea of the horizon out of which we try to think the world means that the idea that we are determined by something that stems from outside of the world, he says, well, that kind of horizon has been fragmenting. So this appearance of an out of the world is dissipated. The outside being of sense, interesting, kind of, well, picking up the idea of what existed before, something that is outside ourselves, but not projected into some sort of, I don't know, a person or force, but the outside being of sense itself. This is what opens inside the world, as far as it still makes sense to talk about an insight. It belongs to its structure. It digs into what will have to be called, instead of the transcendence of its immanence, then Nancy says we have to understand this as transimmanence, or more simply and strongly, its existence and its exposition. Another concept related to being with, being in common, is being exposed. It expresses more or less the same idea as being with. In the end, the thinking of Nancy sounds rather banal, at least to some people, sounds rather banal and self-evident. And often he actually confirmed that during interviews. And these are the last quotes I want to present to you. In this same interview from Libération, he says, well, look, what I tell you here is self-evident, but this naked evidence of an existence, stripped bare in face of a judgment of sense, itself totally exposed, is what gives us at once a chance and an unheard of anxiety. Though our era witnesses from a huge struggle with identitarian movements, I referred to that a couple of times, in the end to Nancy, we should still hope for or still strive for a horizon in which we should not at all be sentimental, not at all familial or communitarian only. We should always look beyond that borders of particular identities. It is existence reclaiming its due or its condition, which is called coexistence. And now my final quote. Together, and the possibility of saying we takes place where the inside, insofar as an inside, becomes an outside. That is, where, without building any common inside, it is given as an external interiority. And this is also typical for Nancy, trying to combine two words which are actually sound like a paradox. It's external interiority. So what does together, after all, means? Not having one's own essence. This is existence, not having any essence, but having being as existence, as one's only essence. And thus the essence is no longer an essence. And of course, I could go on and go on and go on with quoting Nancy time and again, but I think I overwhelmed you more than enough with the quotes I gave you, that there's more than enough to think through or to have some talks during our short Q&A. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Professor Ignaas Devisch, for your insightful lecture. Now I open this session to any to your question and observation. If you have any question, you may type in the chat box. Professor Devisch, I have a question. I was reading your work on Nosy, and somewhere I found that you have written this particularly, that it goes like this, that longing for an original community ends up breeding violence. There are many historical evidences for it, and now I have also read Amartya Sen's book Identity and Violence: The Illusion of Destiny. He also argues that the very notion of identity inheres violence. So, don't you think that both of them are on the same trajectory, or are they different from each other? What is your take on this?
Can you repeat the last part of your question? What would be then similar to each other?
Yes. Don't you think that both of them are running at the same direction? That search for original community ends up breeding violence. And Professor Amartya Sen, in his book Identity and Violence, he also, The Illusion of Destiny, he argues that the very notion of identity inheres violence.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Yes.
No, please do.
So, but don't you think that both of them are running in the same direction? I mean, can we keep them on the same footing?
At least they're partaking from the same register of thoughts, in a sense that, and that might sound today maybe a bit weird if you look at how politics are evolving in so many countries, where way more than 20 or 30 years ago, the stress on particular identity has become more important than it was at the time Nancy wrote about it. What Nancy tried to warn us for, maybe I should start from that. What Nancy tried to warn us against was the fact that there is a relationship between the way you think identity in terms of, is this an exclusive identity or something that is open up to the world, on the one hand, and on the other hand, what in politics, what he then calls politics of destination, some politics that thinks that they can actually make this shared identity become full reality, that there is a danger included in the line of thought and in the realization of this kind of politics, because it is, so to say, factually impossible to be fully enclosed upon yourself. Let's say all people share one and the same identity. There is always something that does not really close. But what we see or what we have seen during Nazism is that this machinery to getting more and more close upon itself does never stop. As I told you, there's always a final effort to be made. I mean, once you have excluded the Jews and homosexuals and the gypsies and other categories that were radically banished from the idea of a Nazi empire, once you have these categories excluded, the fight begins with who are the real Germans. And then you start excluding again and again and again. So what Nancy actually tried to hold a grip on, what Nancy actually tried to understand is this politics of destination, which is ideology, but this ideology stems from a